Hello, I'm Peter Howth. I'm Global Clinical Scientific Lead at GSK. I'm one of the stakeholders, the industry stakeholders in SHARP. And with me today is Fabienne Yon from the Swiss Severe Asthma Grouping. And we are interviewing Celeste Porsbjerg, who is chair of SHARP and a clinician, a researcher, and head of the Severe Asthma Group in Copenhagen. So Celeste, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Peter.
So I just start with the first question. What were you, or what would you describe as your biggest learning as a head of SHARP or a co-head of SHARP?
I think the biggest learning is that there is a really big and strong potential for a great community across Europe that includes both the people we need to work for, the patients and their families, and the clinicians who try to do their best, and the people who develop the medications we need in order to help people, as well as strong researchers who can help us answer important questions. So I think I've always known we are good at these things in Europe, but this community is unique because it brings all of these people together in a very equal way, I think. Everybody has an equal voice. And I think that's fundamental to moving forwards in developing better management, achieving better outcomes for the most severely ill asthma patients.
You came in as co-lead partway, SHARP was already established. Were there particular challenges in taking over, or where do you see yourself as helping with the future directions?
I was, in fact, involved in SHARP from the beginning. I think I attended the very first meeting in Lausanne back when it all started. But I certainly also feel that entering a role as co-chair, what I see is a community that has all of this potential and that we need to unleash. And it's been very important to have people bringing forward their personal energy and good ideas and to be creative and find solutions. And now I think the SHARP CRC is the CRC in ERS who's maybe grown the most and has the biggest potential to turn into something that has a real longevity. So where I see a potential challenge is that we are simply growing. Not everyone can know what everyone is doing all the time. We need to have clear communication on a shared research strategy so that it's clear to everyone what we are trying to achieve more specifically. And that does require us to reconvene these months and think about how we can create an even stronger structure and governance and organization within SHARP, not to dampen people's creativity or wish to participate, but in fact to give it a better platform to unfold and make more impact, because we then create stronger results together.
And you just already talked a bit about the future and the growing. So what is your wishes for the future, or others than you already mentioned?
Well, if I am to try to describe what I think it could be a good vision, is that looking a little further ahead, there are some extremely strong synergies between what we're doing and the impact we can make. Of course, SHARP is a research consortium. To my mind, research is about creating knowledge that helps people, getting the best ideas from the people we need to help. And for me, research is also education and training others so that the research results that we achieve actually do make an impact. So for me, a vision of SHARP could be that we would be part of the engine in driving better management by making sure that the best evidence is used in the best way for all patients, and driving these things through collecting data in our daily clinical setting in a systematic, protocolized way based on clinical protocols that aid us in understanding when we need to do, what we need to do, how do we down titrate all steroids, what do we assess if the patient has an exacerbation, so that we try to do it in a similar way, because then we will gain more knowledge about how our patients are doing. We can report that in research papers and we can teach people. And we can also have an impact on the way that patients are managed by having a system that is not only for data collection, but is also for guiding clinicians at the same time, that is also for educating all of the new specialists, all of the medical doctors, nurses, and other allied healthcare professionals, and the patients, that we can educate the patients to understand what to expect from a good management in a specialized setting. So that would be my ultimate vision, that we talk less about this as research and more about excellence.
You mentioned earlier on about different stakeholders in SHARP, and do they all have equal standing, or how do the stakeholders interact?
It's an important challenge, I think, that we do need to consider. I mean, I do think people are quite equal compared to what you might see in other contexts when doing research. But I think we could use more of the strength of having patients involved, more of the strength of having clinicians involved, more of the strength of having our colleagues from the pharmaceutical industry involved who really understand what is it you need to demonstrate to be allowed to have a drug approved at all. I mean, there is actually some barriers there that you need to circumvent. I think we could do better, and I am hopeful that it's something that we can be a little more systematic about, how we make sure that all of these voices are heard in the same way. As researchers, we are very used to having the scientific publication as the end goal. We need to be careful that we are not biased, because our own ambitions as researchers is to have publications. But that needs to be a benefit to a patient. Otherwise, I don't think it's within the keeping of the vision of SHARP, certainly. And I don't personally think it's within the keeping of research overall. But of course, that's an opinion. So I think we could do more.
It has to be with the patient at the center, doesn't it?
Yes, I think the especially important challenge, but also I think really very interesting potential, is how we do unleash the potential of getting patients involved. And to me, I think this has happened maybe in a way that has been a little too open, because as a patient you join meetings where you're not necessarily able to follow, what is my role here, what are we really talking about. So I'm hopeful that we can evolve the structure of SHARP into having a more visible patient-led hub. Not that there can't be people in that hub who are other things than patients, but it sort of needs to have that sign on the door that this is where patients talk about how do we communicate, which research do we do, which education, what do we need to work on. And I think it can be done, but we really need to think about how we target activities where we can specifically invite patients in to participate in a meaningful way. If you are somebody with severe asthma, you already struggle to look after your job and your family. Yes. So we can't expect people to just sit for meetings. They need to be there for a reason. And that's something I think we've been fairly good at, but we could certainly evolve more. And I'm really, really positive that we have an excellent co-chair in Olivia Fulton, who I think is a very competent person to drive that sort of process forward.
We were interviewing one of the patients for a similar podcast, and I think one of the things that came out of that was some consideration about a patient forum, or I wouldn't call it a chat room, but somewhere where patients can engage with each other and learn from their experiences.
I most certainly think that would be a very good idea. And I also think, and that is why I really hope we can create a patient hub, is because I want it to be the patients who decide whether they need a forum, how that forum looks, how often do you meet, what do you discuss, things like that. But what I could suggest is also to try and understand what patients need to learn from us around what research is, what evidence is. Right now, we have the bypass study where we've gone out and asked everyone with asthma and their physician in a very open way, what bothers you the most? And that has been written up into a scientific paper, which is quite difficult because when you do these qualitative research studies, they have a certain format that they need to have,
yes,
which makes them very, very time consuming. And I think it's frustrating for patients when it's then difficult to get that message out. And I'm also thinking politicians and healthcare payers, they don't necessarily read the Lancet. They might. But, where is it that we need to make sure that we tell the story, the important messages and things like that? So I think that's something researchers need to learn about. But then also when we're talking about patients, just helping patients understand why is research strong when it's done the right way? How can you do good research also in a simple way? It doesn't need to be very complicated. It just needs to be done in the right way. And I think that is also empowerment, that you help people to have some expertise to say, well, we have this documentation. We know that the statistics say how affected we are, all those things.
I think you mentioned a very interesting point that we as a scientific community have to learn how we bring our results to the decision maker, to the policy makers, that will in fact then improve patients' lives, help clinicians to practice, help pharmaceutical companies, and also the scientific community. I think that's a very important point you mentioned, where we probably can also learn from patients because they have maybe more experience where to target the needs or how to have a bigger voice with the policymakers or something. Yeah, that's also something. It's not that only the patients learn from us, but we can also learn from the patients.
It also comes back to another point that I think when we talk about how to improve management of patients with severe asthma, we often talk about how we can educate doctors everywhere, and that is important, of course. But patients will see different doctors in a lifetime. They might move, they might be lucky, they might be unlucky. And I think we could have more focus on making sure that the patient is an expert. And that also comes down to when we talk about research, because if enough patients know about the evidence that's out there, the new treatments, the problem with having to be on oral steroids. I was at the Brompton last week in London, and I must say it was utterly shocking for me to see this department full of patients on oral steroids who they tried to down titrate to see if they could see a signal of type 2 inflammation, so maybe they could give them lipolizumab. Whereas in Denmark, where I practice, we would basically just put people straight on a biologic. At least we're allowed to use in that situation Dupixent. So, I mean, if patients know what we've shown, if they know it in a way where they can tell their neighbor in an understandable, interesting, engaging way, then I don't think we should underestimate how much they can spread the word. Certainly, many of my patients are full-time working professionals, or many of them here in the Copenhagen area with good jobs and good positions. And I think we need to make sure that they know what they should be driving for. Yeah. I think there's a strength, and certainly I also think it's a good way of securing that anyone with a chronic condition know what to expect and when to say this is not good enough and I need something else.
Celeste, thank you very much for giving us your vision. Fabienne, Jorn and myself have been interviewing Celeste Porsbjerg, co-chair of SHARP. Thank you for listening.
If you'd like to hear more podcasts about the work being done by SHARP from the perspectives of different stakeholders, then visit the SHARP website at europeanlung.org/SHARP. You can also find additional information about SHARP projects and research programs as well as how to join the Sharp CRC by visiting the website.